Hey everybody, welcome to, I think, episode 41, Radio Free Ortona. It's just me and Paddy today in an all right-wing radical duet because Trent's new part-time job seems to be pretty full-time. Today, so we're leaving Spain until Trent can come back.
Yep.
Today, this is a kind of a subject of my request. I found myself in the peculiar shoes this week of finding two institutions, in air quotes, that I support.
Entities,
that I support at odds with each other. What happened, I've recommended the podcast MartyrMade a number of times on here, and its host, Daryl Cooper. I think it's generally been a pretty good podcast, a historical podcast. He's done a couple of really good series, one on the Zionism in the 19th and early 20th century, right up to the foundation of the State of Israel. And then another great series for about 33 hours on Jim Jones and Jonestown. And it was, I found both series to be educational, enlightening, and really interesting. And I think one of the reasons I really like Cooper is because, like me, he has a compulsive need to over-contextualize, which is why these things get to be...
what's his first name? Daryl Cooper. That's it.
Daryl Cooper,
Yeah, Daryl Cooper.
Anyway, so... last week, about Wednesday, I think, Tucker Carlson dropped a 2-hour-long episode of his podcast where he had Cooper on. Cooper said some interesting, in scare quotes, things about an upcoming series he's planning on the Second World War. And one of the things he said was that he thought Churchill might be the chief villain of the Second World War. Which he later qualified to say that didn't mean that Stalin and Hitler were not villains too.
Yeah, he just puts them in league, or he puts them on the same category.
Yeah. This caught the ire of the Free Press. And there was...
And you better maybe say who the Free Press is.
And the Free Press is an online publication founded by Bari Weiss, former, I think, assistant opinion editor at the New York Times, who very vocally left the Times about 4 years ago with a very in a flourish with an open letter that she published to the Times, and so she's founded this online publication she calls the Free Press, and she's brought in a lot of people to contribute, do reporting and just contributing. Douglas Murray is a contributor. Niall Ferguson is a staff. Was a contributor and kind of a staff historian kind of thing. Eli Lake is now a staffer at, not even just a contributor, a full-time staffer there, along with Barry's wife, Nellie Bowles, and some others.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the Holocaust and Israel and anything to do with Jews is kind of a third rail with the Free Press. And I get that.
Sure.
You know, Bari Weiss has never been... apologetic of her stand on Zionism and stuff like that, nor should she. But when Cooper started challenging the narrative, the commonly held narrative of the Second World War, which I've never really had much reason to question.
Now, he first did this on Tucker's podcast, or has he been doing this on Twitter and Substack as well?
Not really. I haven't seen it on any of his Substack stuff. I read pretty much everything he posts because he posts pretty infrequently on Substack.
Okay. So really, the first
this is kind of the first
ideas.
Like I've heard him on the other podcast he does with Jocko Willink, called The Unraveling.
Which he mentioned. Yeah.
Yeah. I have heard him say that he thought after Hitler and Stalin that Churchill might have been the third villain of the Second World War.
Yeah.
And it's hard to. He's like. Sometimes he seems like he's of the opinion that nothing is worth war. You know, like even subjugation and an capitulation is preferable. Is preferable to the
to the mass death and destruction of war.
Yeah. So Cooper's history, he's a Navy veteran. He was like a radar operator, and then after he got out of the Navy, he was a contractor with, I think, Raytheon, but I don't know if he's ever.
He mentioned that.
But anyway, he's done
on Tucker, where he talked. He worked for
A Navy contractor.
National defense or defense industry.
Yeah, he was a contractor.
Yeah.
He talks about it more like when he on the Unraveling podcast
Yeah.
in more detail. He was like a radar expert, and so he
Right.
went all around the world working on radars and upgrading
Yeah.
radars and with American allies.
Gotcha.
So, just to give a bit of his background, so he is a veteran, but he's not really a combat arms guy. But
Yeah.
not that it matters. Anyway, so I'm left in this place of Cooper says this thing, which pretty sure I don't agree with.
Yep.
You know, he went on to say other things like he talked about like the plight of Russian prisoners of war that
Yep.
the Germans took in Operation Barbarossa, and he alleges that basically the result of the high rate of death of Russian and POWs and political prisoners that the Germans took during Barbarossa was basically because the Germans didn't plan for it.
Yeah. It was systemic neglect, not genocide.
Not genocide. The conventional view, of course, is genocide.
Yes.
So the Free Press's rebuttal, rebuttals, really, in very quick order, which is kind of like caused me to raise an eyebrow.
Right.
They had one by Niall Ferguson,
Yep.
one by Victor Davis Hanson, which were kind of both of a piece. They were both dealing with the history,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And then they had another one by Sohrab Ahmari, who was kind of looking more at Cooper's online persona, especially how he behaves on X, which he
Is he provocative? Again,
he's
I haven't
very
seen the stuff on it.
provocative on X. Yeah, yeah. Like he posted one of the ones that Ahmari cited, or actually Bari Weiss, because Bari Weiss also posted a rebuttal piece.
Yeah.
Which I did not. I read the first bit of it, and then she diverged off into a defense of why she was focusing on left wing extremism versus right wing extremism.
Okay.
And I didn't finish that. So
Yeah.
but she did post one of Cooper's ex posts, and he had a picture from the opening ceremonies, the controversial Last Supper with the trans people,
right.
and that
In France. Yeah.
and then he posted a picture of Hitler and the Nazi leadership walking through Paris after France fell. And he said the picture, and picture was on the left, and the right. He said the picture on the left is far preferable to the picture on the right.
In other words, Hitler and the Nazis, or
Yeah,
oh,
yeah,
oh,
yeah.
ooh,
I wonder if I can find it here.
or pull up some of his stuff on X. While you're doing that, I'll say that as kind of just the quick and dirty research for this, I did watch the first half of the Tucker Carlson episode with Cooper, up to the point where they finished speaking about the Second World War. Now I was interested in it. It kept me engaged. I'll say that for it. And I would have liked to have finished it, specifically how they talk about the immigration controversy going on in the Western world now. But it wasn't germane to this episode, so I was limited time. And then I went and I read Hanson and Ferguson's rebuttals as they were published in the Free Press. And I will say that I think the difference between the two was that Hanson took issue with the historical fact or the interpretation of the historical events that Cooper offered. Whereas Ferguson took a greater exception to the methodology, not so much the conclusion. Although he is critical of the conclusions, I thought the real thrust of his critique was not just on, and not exclusively like Hanson's, where it was on the conclusions that Cooper drew, but the methodology that Cooper employed to arrive at those conclusions.
Right.
And then a broader critique of how history as a discipline, as an academic discipline, as an intellectual exercise, how is history done? And he touches on that. And that's something that I think is definitely worth talking about in this episode. I will also say that, I took exception with oh dear. Okay, so we're looking at the on the screen here on the tweet that the MartyrMade podcast, which I guess is Cooper.
Yeah, that's Cooper. Yeah.
And yeah, he has the two photos. He says this may be putting it too crudely for some, but the picture on the left, namely Hitler and his entourage with the Eiffel Tower in the background, was infinitely preferable in virtually every way than the one on the right, which was the parody of the Last Supper in the Paris Olympics. And then there is a reply by a Semovich, which said after the Paris.
Actually, I think it's actually a retweet. I think the original post was by Cernovich, and Cooper retweeted it.
And the text is after the Paris opening ceremony, which I put on for my daughters. I don't care what happens to France. It can't get any worse than the few minutes we saw. Insulting to Christians and secular people alike. Go to hell, Paris. Okay, can you scroll down to the next tweet where Cooper says, if you're having a bad day, just remember that the Trump shooter is currently wandering around hell looking for Hitler, while the two guys Kyle Rittenhouse dropped figure out how to break the news to him. That he didn't get Hitler? Or that he...
Hitler's not in hell. Is he...
Oh. Yikes. Okay, so go to the next one down. Mm-hmm. What utter nonsense the passages you quoted were from before. Could you read that one out? It's a bit small for me from where I'm sitting.
Yeah. So this one is Cooper responding to somebody. I'm not sure, but this one I actually don't necessarily have a lot of disagreement with if you're a Christian.
Okay.
Right. Jews would have a lot of problems with this.
Okay.
Right. So anyway, yeah. So Cooper says, "What utter nonsense! The passages you quoted were from before the Babylonian exile. God promised to restore Israel from that exile, and he did, when the Persians repatriated the Jews to Jerusalem. Then, during the Second Temple period, Jerusalem corrupted the priesthood, and God sent the Romans to destroy the leprous temple and put an end to the Israelite religion for all time. He never promised to restore them from that, and the New Testament makes clear as day that there would be no restoration from that. If you're a Christian, it requires ignoring everything Christ ever said to believe that the Old Covenant still has any validity." He means the Old Covenant between God and the Jews from the Old Testament.
If you're a Christian, it requires ignoring everything Christ ever said to believe. So, if you're a Christian, it requires ignoring everything Christ ever said about something. Am I reading that right?
Mm-hmm. Christ ever said...
About, a topic X.
Well, the topic X being the God's old covenant in the Old Testament with the Jewish people.
So he's saying that to be a Christian, it requires you to ignore something or to ignore what Christ said about a given topic. Is that the way? Am I reading that right?
No. It says if you're a Christian, it requires ignoring everything Christ ever said to believe that the Old Covenant still has any validity.
Oh, okay. So that if you're a Christian and you believe that the Old Covenant still has any validity, you're ignoring everything Christ ever said.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, carry on, please.
Yeah. It still hasn't. There's actually a comment that we never finished that sentence.
Okay.
Literally just requires you to call Christ a liar.
Okay, yes. Like an antique bed, conclusions must not be jumped upon.
Yeah. Yes. The Jews were not chosen for their extra special DNA. As Christ says, God could raise up children of Abraham from stones if he wanted. They were chosen for a task. And when that covenant was opened to the Gentiles, that special task was complete. After Christ, the Jewish people are no different from any other people, although Jews who accept Christ have an honored place as elder brothers in the church. God didn't break the promise of the covenant. The Gospels couldn't be more plain than any Jews who rejected the expansion of the covenant to the Gentiles were rejecting God and withdrawing themselves from the covenant. The only way you dispies, I don't know, that's some kind of I don't know what dispies means.
Diaspora? I don't know.
Maybe. Okay. Yeah, it could be a slang term for diaspora Jews. I don't know.
Okay, yeah, maybe.
The only way you Dispies get to this ridiculous interpretation is by ignoring the Gospels and focusing on idiosyncratic and really quite absurd interpretation of the Book of Revelation.
Okay.
So that gets into some Christian theology versus Jewish
and
theology.
I have heard that.
Yeah.
Like he's not. I'm not an expert on Christian theology by any stretch of the imagination, but I have heard that same idea.
Yeah.
That the coming of Christ opened the covenant of God to all peoples.
To all peoples, yes, not just.
So
Jews.
it was not. Yeah, it was not a tribal thing. It was a matter of personal choice.
Yes.
That you chose to enter into this covenant.
Yes.
I have also heard from the Jewish side that the role of Judaism is to be an example to humanity, to try to be good people. Basically, I'm summing it really short.
Yeah.
Painting with a massive broad brush here, or a roller instead of a fine point brush. That this covenant still does exist, but it's not that the Jews are God's chosen people
Anymore. Exactly.
It's that the Jews are God's example. To say, hey, this is how, by following these rules and by this creed, you show the world how to be good people.
Yeah.
Right. So that's now I don't know if that's actual Jewish theology, or if that was just one person that, when I saw this, it was in an interview. I don't know if it was that one person's personal interpretation. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. But okay, that one I'm not freaking out on. Not like the other two. The other two were like, ooh, red flares arcing up into the night sky.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and Cooper, to try and put it in the best light possible, like especially in Jocko, he's even said like, I really shouldn't be on Twitter.
Yeah.
I behave badly on Twitter. Yeah. He trolls on Twitter, right? Yeah. And part of the issue, like especially with the Paris thing, like the guy who designed the opening ceremonies, said it wasn't. It actually wasn't aimed at the Last Supper at all. It was actually more of a reference to the Greek Diogenes, I believe it was, who was like I can't remember exactly, the mother of like celebrations. I can't remember.
Okay, yeah.
But so
Dionysus,
maybe, maybe, maybe
like
Dionysus,
the god of festival and celebration.
I think that's
wild, uninhibited celebration.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what the guy. So Christians freaked out about it because they thought it was
they saw
the Last Supper in it. Yeah,
right, okay,
yeah, with the like the halo over the central large person's head. Yeah,
okay, yeah. So he's definitely like red flags going up in the night there.
Yeah. So for me, I'm like, holy shit! Like I've recommended this guy's podcast. And I still think the two series that he's mostly done are really good, and is actually the one he's working on called "Who's America," which he's been looking at the labor movement at America at different points, has been really quite interesting. But yeah, I'm like,
okay, so let me ask you a couple questions. How much, before those two podcasts, how much did you know about the history of Zionism?
Not very much.
How much did you know about Jonestown?
Not more than most other people. Like I remember seeing, I think, a documentary about it when I was in elementary school.
Yeah,
that was like aired. Like I didn't see it at school. I saw it at home. Yeah, my parents were interested in it, but like not.
I'd say the same thing. Like I remember seeing 2 or 3 documentaries. On stuff like the History Channel, like cable TV. Yeah, which are like maybe an hour long. And they are at best superficial surveys. Yeah. Because they just don't have the time to get deep into it. And I had definitely heard before how Jones was absolutely an early civil rights figure. And that he absolutely campaigned in the 1950s for racial equality and civil liberties for all. Yeah. And the narrative I kind of took away from what little I knew was that the power of being in absolute control of that group of people basically drove him insane. That it was a story of absolute power going to, it was like almost like a warning, a parable of
Yeah.
the dangers of putting too much power and authority in the hands of one mind.
Yeah, and have you listened to Cooper's thing? Like, it kind of turned into one of the interesting things is, like, not many people have heard them, but the People's Temple made audio recordings of almost everything, right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of video recordings. So
Yeah.
Cooper talked about how he listened to like 1,500 hours
exactly.
of Jim Jones, and he got to the point where he could tell whether Jones had
Yeah.
been on drugs that day or if he was sober.
Yeah, or if
what.
he had taken his barbiturates, or if he was still on amphetamines. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so, it wasn't a quick process. And like, you probably got to that part where Cooper said, if Jim Jones had been hit by a bus in 1960, he would have been
Right.
He would have been remembered
in a totally different way.
Yeah, as a groundbreaking civil rights leader and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But
Now, I would say that's critical.
Yeah,
That's essential. In that, he's dealing with two topics that most people know very little about.
Mm-hmm.
And then when he goes into a topic that has a lot of knowledge out there,
yeah,
there are a lot of people who have extensively studied the Second World War. For example,
it is probably. I think Ferguson might have said it in his piece. It was like the most expensively studied thing in recent human history, right? Like, there's so many books.
Like, Hanson has made his career in two topics: classical history and the Second World War.
Yeah, pretty much.
So I think that's, like, to me, this is not a problem. This is the system. When I say the system, like, I mean the process of not just academic, intellectual discourse in the pursuance of the truth. This is the system working as it should. Now, I think it's really important here. It should be noted that Hanson and Ferguson are hard right-wingers. Mm-hmm. They are hard conservatives.
Yep.
This is not criticism coming from the left.
No.
This is not
Well, and even Sohrab Ahmari is kind of, or at least was. His piece was had an interesting starting point, but he was kind of from that in a little bit in that post-liberal NatCon movement for a little while.
Yeah. Like, this is not, like, Zinn's dead, so obviously it's not going to work. But this is not a criticism coming from Howard Zinn.
No.
This is not a criticism coming from left-wing historians.
No.
This is a criticism coming from the right. So I think that's something we should bear in mind.
Yeah.
When your own technically own side of the aisle, if we're going to call Tucker Carlson and what I believe Matthew Goodwin is his name, definitely Goodwin. I think it's Matt Goodwin. What he has referred to as national conservatism.
Yeah.
You're still technically right now in conventional wisdom.
I think it actually should be called nationalist conservatism.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, it could be. Right. Nationalist conservative. Yeah, it's still technically on the right side of the aisle. Yeah. When people on that side of the aisle are criticizing you, then it's doubly worth paying attention to.
Yeah.
Right? Like when if like in the same way like Thomas Piketty in his History of Capitalism, mm-hmm. if someone like Catherine McKenna had taken exception, or who's the woman who wrote Klein, I think her name is?
Naomi Klein?
Naomi Klein, yeah. Who wrote Shock Therapy and such like that.
Disaster Capitalism.
Now, if she had criticized that, then that's something I would really pay attention to. Yeah. Because, I expect Niall Ferguson to go after Piketty. I expect that. Yeah. I expect a guy like, say a contributor to the Federalist to go after him on his method. Yeah. And I would be disappointed if they didn't. But I take that with a grain of salt when I look at that analysis. Yeah. But if someone on your side of the aisle goes after your methodology or your result, then I'm really interested in it. Yeah. Right? Because again, that goes contrary to our conceptualization of cognitive bias, mm-hmm. right? So I think that's really worth looking at here, that Ferguson and Hanson are conservatives. They are on the right, and they're going after Cooper here. And again, like from what I know of the Second World War, and I'm not in Hanson's category.
Yeah.
But I did study history as part of my degree. I learned German almost for the express purpose of being able to study the Second World War and its aftermath.
Right.
And look at original source documents, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, I agree that I did not, I thought Cooper was way off base.
Yeah.
With what he said about the bombing campaign and the prisoners. Like, I agree. The Germans were not prepared to take that level of prisoners. I don't take issue with that. Mm-hmm. But they were also not prepared to take the number of prisoners that they did in the Low Countries in France in 1940.
Yeah.
The difference is they made a point of saying, okay, let's commit the resources and get these people, these prisoners, food and accommodation.
Yeah.
They deliberately said, we don't care with the Russian prisoners.
Yeah. Well, I think Hitler wanted them exterminated anyway. Like,
Yeah.
Ferguson.
They just were not a priority.
Ferguson, in his response, he cited himself.
Yeah.
Which is fine.
I think his point of doing that was to address Carlson's comment that if you question the dominant narrative of the Second World War, you are sanctioned, you're canceled.
Yeah.
And Ferguson cited himself to deliberately say, look, I wrote this years ago.
Yeah.
I have never faced sanction for this.
Yeah.
So that's why I think he did that.
But he was when he's citing himself, he was talking about like German general orders coming down to just summarily execute.
Yeah. And my biggest criticism of Ferguson is he does not lack self-confidence.
No.
I find Ferguson can get a little caught up, in hubris sometimes.
Yeah.
And I think that makes him susceptible to, how would you say, not looking too closely at certain details.
Yeah.
Whereas I much prefer, say, someone like Hanson's analysis. Especially, like in extrapolating from historical events kind of thing. I much prefer to look at Hanson. But one thing that Ferguson pointed out in terms of the methodology, and this is why I say that this is the system naturally correcting itself. Mm-hmm. You present an idea into the public sphere, and after a little, or you present multiple ideas into the public sphere, and this is how your reputation and credibility is built. You provide a quality product again and again and again and again, and it withstands the scrutiny, the sunlight of the public square.
Yeah.
And so this is a part of that process. Cooper put out 2 products that were widely regarded with a high quality. Mm-hmm. And again, neither Ferguson nor Hanson took issue with his earlier stuff.
No.
Because again, they don't know.
Yeah, all the responses. It was a 2.5 hour podcast.
Yeah.
And they focused on
the Second World War, which they know.
Yeah, which was about 20 minutes of it.
Yeah.
Right. Well, but even they knew, but Sohrab Ahmari and Bari Weiss, their criticism of all of this same period in this podcast, right?
Yeah, exactly. So a guy puts out stuff that seems good because we don't know any better.
Yeah.
Now, maybe we could find someone who was an absolute expert in Middle Eastern history. Maybe, now I can usually quote Bernard Lewis, who has, I know his authority or his expertise is primarily on the history of Islam.
Right.
But due to geographical proximity, I would imagine Bernard Lewis has a great deal to say about Zionism of the, say, from 1800 to 1947. Now, he would be a good guy to ask, hey, have you heard this? What do you think about it, right?
Yeah.
And then maybe had there been that earlier scrutiny, maybe we wouldn't think that well of Cooper to start with.
That could be.
Could be. But the point is that now Cooper has an opportunity here. Put forth your argument.
Yeah.
And let's meet on the battlefield of ideas and we'll see, if your scholarship holds up.
And his initial response to the whole thing, I had no idea what happened, and then I just was going through my email while sitting on the crapper in the morning on Friday, and I see he put a note. So I just clicked on went over to the note and read and said, and it was like a reply about I don't have a response to the mob yet, but thanks for all the new subscribers.
Sure.
And then he just posted a half hour from one of the episodes of the Zionism podcast, where he is like, it's like a half hour intro to one of the it was probably like the 4 or 5 hour episode long episode, where he talks about the Holocaust, and he talks about how he wasn't sure how he's going to talk about the Holocaust because the Holocaust almost needs its own series.
Yeah, it might be worthy of its own. Yeah,
of its own series,
own separate examination.
But I think that was in response because Weiss in her piece essentially accused him of Holocaust denial when she talked about when he was talking about the Russian prisoners, and I don't think that's actually fair. I think he was just talking about German response to Russian prisoners and POWs in Barbarossa, and he wasn't trying to do Holocaust denial or anything. So I think that was a little unfair. One of the things that it just like twinked my lizard brain is like this is kind of like the Free Press's version. I shouldn't say that, but like when you just like wham hit them with both barrels right off the bat, it's kind of the same as or has similarities to the 50 intelligence expert who say Hunter Biden's laptop is Russian disinformation, and the responses to the lab leak theory and nature and science and all this stuff, right? And it's just like, it makes me uneasy. Well, I guess.
Okay, and that's fair.
Right?
Especially if your initial impressions of Cooper were good.
Yeah.
Now, you see, I don't have that.
Yeah.
Because I have this is my initial impression of Cooper.
Exactly, right? So,
so yeah, I can see that. But then, again, I'm saying the system's working as it should.
Generally, yeah.
Because now what you can do is say, okay, I want to go learn more about Jonestown.
Yeah.
I'm going to go find other sources and see if it meshes with what Cooper said.
Yeah. And so here I'm also wondering, because he talks about...
Because you're looking at his work in isolation.
Yes, absolutely.
And you can't do that with the Second World War.
No.
So maybe it's an opportunity to go back and revisit what you know of Jonestown. So now Cooper has a direct comparative.
Yeah. I mean, again, like you said, not that we're super knowledgeable in Jonestown, but nothing he said in the podcast seemed like...
Yeah, it didn't fail the sniff test.
It didn't fail the sniff test. And nothing contradicted anything I already knew.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And
but if there was bullshit in there...
So that has me...
How would you know?
Is that has me wondering, is his... Because he talks about how much he reads and how much is like... And Ferguson
mentions this.
Kind of made this point of... Is... like here's quality work and there's not quality work. And if Cooper's reading everything and giving it all the same weight, that's problematic.
Right.
Right. So is he doing that?
Yeah.
What did Bari Weiss say? Something. That train of thought just whistled out of my head.
Okay. Well, do you need time, or I'll throw out something that
go ahead.
Ferguson put in there, saying that he looked for what has Cooper written.
Yeah. Well, Cooper really hasn't...
He hasn't written anything.
It's all audio. Yeah.
Yeah, it's all audio.
Yeah, no, what he has written is on his Substack.
And that is a product of our times. Mm-hmm. And Substack, I think, is a solution to this.
Yeah.
In that the different... Like, you and I, what are our qualifications?
Nothing.
The only qualification you and I have for being here right now is that you own a pair of microphones. That is it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, who the hell are we?
Yeah, we're a couple of schlubs, and occasionally 3 schlubs, just trying to, with no special experience or knowledge, just trying to figure stuff out.
Just trying to figure stuff out. Yeah. And over time, we will be seen to be either to have effectively captured the zeitgeist, or to have been completely talking through our hats.
Yeah.
And the audience will decide that over time. Mm-hmm. And this is how all authorities, like... There was a time when the Washington Post and the New York Times were startup rags that nobody had ever heard of, and they had zero credibility whatsoever.
Yeah.
They built their reputations over time by producing a superb journalistic product. And these things all come full circle because we're now seeing the Times and the Washington Post lose their credibility because they stopped producing a quality product.
Yeah.
And then other media sources are moving up to replace them.
Yeah.
Part of the something that we're learning to shake out with the internet is learning, okay, who's credible and who's not.
Yeah. Well, and that's something
is,
we're still learning, right?
And this is exactly where we were at the very beginning of the broadsheet era, say from 1890 to 1920.
Right.
With the mass production of the printing press, any fool could make a newspaper. And so how do you, as the public, know which one is a quality newspaper and which one is not? The point is, or there's no instant way of knowing.
Yeah.
We take that for granted, having grown up in the late 20th century.
Yeah.
When media authority was well established. We had certain institutions that we could automatically say, okay, this person is credible. Do they have, say, are they a professor at a university?
Yeah.
That was automatically credential. And does this person write for a major newspaper? Mm-hmm. Is this person a published author? And that instant credibility. It's just that now we are living at the nexus where these previous institutions are heavily discredited, particularly the media and academia.
Yeah.
Where it's almost to the point where being a university professor hurts your credibility.
Yeah.
And we're now at this point where there's a great democratization of scholarship through podcasts. Mm-hmm. And there's going to be a sorting out period that cannot be rushed. It simply has to follow its course, where over time we, the public, are going to learn, like, yeah, this guy produces a quality product because his work has stood the test of time.
Yeah.
Like, say, I'll give you an example of this, Peter Zeihan.
Mm-hmm.
Big internet following, was seen as very authoritative.
Yeah.
But he's been predicting the imminent collapse of China within 2 years for the past 20 years.
Yeah.
Right? And there's a lot of things where Zeihan is just flat out wrong.
Yeah.
So he's not seen as the authority figure now that he was, say, 7 to 10 years ago.
Yeah. Even though he might be more popular now.
He's more popular now.
Yeah.
But I don't think you seriously look at Zeihan as saying, well, look, man, like, you wouldn't base your investments on advice Zeihan gives you.
No. Like, and I remember I talked to you about this once before. I heard Zeihan, he did one of his YouTube things. He's from Calgary.
Yeah.
He was in Calgary at the time. And he was talking about the Canadian energy industry.
Yes.
And he said he talked about a couple technical issues.
Yeah.
And with my background in the energy industry, I knew those things to be wrong.
No, that ain't right.
That ain't how it
Right.
worked. And he was talking about, I think one was money and one was like how stuff was actually produced. I was like, no, that's not right.
That ain't right. Yeah.
But Chris Williamson, who has the Modern William podcast.
Modern Wisdom?
Modern Wisdom, sorry.
Yeah.
He's talked about this. He had Eric Weinstein on, and he mentioned it with him and somebody else he had a couple episodes ago. And he mentioned Zeihan specifically. And his thing with Zeihan is, Zeihan never says, I don't know.
Right.
Yeah, Zeihan is absolutely 100% certain of everything he says.
Everything he says.
Right? Like, and most experts will be like, this could go wrong, or this could go wrong, and this could shake out this way or this way. But depending on what happens, but Zeihan's like, this is going to happen.
This is what's going to happen. Yeah.
He's like, Zeihan knows what the level of nitrogen will be in Russian farming soil in 7 years. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And so this is part of the process where... Yeah, I watch Zeihan stuff because it makes for great conversation.
It's interesting.
It's thought-provoking.
Yeah.
But I do not consider him authoritative.
Don't make a bet on it.
Yeah, exactly. Not at all. And so this is maybe where we go with Cooper.
And I was thinking, because I stumbled the other day on YouTube, last week I guess it was, on this YouTube channel. I'll bring it up here. Called Unlearning Economics.
Okay.
And the reason was, in my feed popped up a video.
Yeah.
This one right here. It's Thomas Sowellsworth, and I thought.
Okay. What's his thesis?
His thesis is that Thomas Hole is wrong about pretty much everything.
Okay.
That's a tough one.
Get up pretty early in the morning.
Exactly. So he doesn't have let's go here to his channel page. Whoops. Stop. So he's got this 6-minute introduction video.
Yeah.
Anyway, he's a British guy.
Okay. What on his title up there, it says more beside it. I'm an academic economist from the UK.
Yeah.
Who has long been critical of the economics profession and how economics is used in public policy. Most of the channel will cover economics with a critical perspective, but I aim to educate people about economics in the process. So I'll try to explain key concepts and ideas along the way. That way, even if you disagree with aspects of the videos, you will hopefully learn something from them. I'm interested in more than just economics and will likely do videos covering other topics such as statistics and politics. Okay, fair enough.
Yeah. So what I came to, where's go to the videos, just to show he doesn't have a huge number of videos.
Yeah, he's kind of starting out, I guess.
Yeah,
well,
it's not
got a fair library.
Yeah, but this is the total library. Like it's not like 2 pages,
Okay.
so it's like.
And what's the second row there? Making sense of capitalism.
Yeah,
Uber makes us angry.
It's interesting because he started off with shorter videos, 10, 11 minutes.
Sure.
10, 11 minutes. Then he does everything's, or so there's a half hour one of his seventh video is as long as video at the time being a half hour. Mm-hmm. Then he does a Q&A that's an hour long, and then suddenly next one's 45 minutes, and then everything goes out to be over an hour.
Okay, so he's getting better at probably editing.
Yeah, could be.
And he's learning how to, like when I'm throwing a dart here because I know what I know about this fits in a thimble. But I'm going to guess that when he first started out, taking his raw material, his footage, and making it into a video probably took him a long time to do.
Yeah, that's probably true.
So that's limited what his stuff was. But now he's got better software, maybe got a better computer. Editing is a lot faster.
It's probably more about the editing process than anything.
Yeah, that's my guess. And so now he can make more content because processing that content into a product is now something he's better able to do.
Yeah. But so the whole reason I bring the channel up, he's got another one, a screed against Jordan Peterson as well. He goes at Steven Pinker.
Okay.
So I watched the Thomas Hole video. I think I probably watched about 45 minutes of it, and then I'm like, and in the video he has all these other economists agreeing with Sol or saying Sol is smart, Sol is good. You can't argue with Sol and all this, right?
Yeah.
And then he's like, but I'm gonna have a go at Sol.
Okay. Fair.
Fair enough. But so then my thing was, is it worth my time to try and go into this guy's try and figure out. Because you really need to go back to his back catalog and to figure out where he's really coming from. Because he doesn't really articulate it in the Soul video, other than to say, he's a bit of a lefty. Mm-hmm. And so then I start wondering, well, is he just disagreeing with everyone because he's trying to make stuff fit
for himself,
or stuff fit his narrative,
or is he just a natural contrarian?
So the question becomes, like these people, like Cooper, this guy, Zihan, all these people who are basically opposed to the conventional narratives.
Okay.
Is it worth your time?
Well,
right?
And this is a question like you're talking about. Who do you trust?
Yeah.
Credibility. Now, I think there are two ways we can do this. The first is just look at it over time. What are their arguments?
Yeah.
And do they withstand scrutiny over a 5 to 7 year period?
Yeah.
That's a long time. I think it's 100% reliable, but it takes a long time.
Yeah.
In the short term, I go to Ferguson's question. What has he published?
Yeah.
And I think that's really important because if I'm a book publisher, you're asking me to assume risk for your product.
Yeah.
So let's say you write a book about, I don't know, give me a topic about t-shirts.
Sure.
What makes a t-shirt, better than another t-shirt? Or no, let's say guns. You read a book about guns because that would definitely happen.
Yes.
You are asking me to assume a fair amount of risk. Mm-hmm. Like I'm paying you for this product. I'm also paying for the physical books, and I'm paying to distribute these physical books, and I am gambling that enough people will feel that your knowledge of guns is worth
them shelling out
$15.95 or $29.95 for the hardcover to buy your book. So I have to have confidence.
Yes.
Me and my editorial team, or say at Penguin Books, or like not a university press even, like a private publisher.
Yeah.
That our editorial team, and we've seen a lot of authors come and a lot of authors go.
Yeah.
That we have confidence that, this product is good, it'll sell.
Yeah.
And if somebody does not have that, red flag.
Yeah.
Or not a red flag. It's just big grain of salt on the table.
Yeah.
This guy doesn't know anything more about than anybody else and should not be taken as definitive.
Yeah.
Until somebody else is going to put skin in the game based on what you do, we should just assume that the guy's product has no value. And everything should be verified against hard copy sources. Or somebody who has proven themselves over the last 7 to 10 years as being an authority on the subject because their observations have stood the test of time.
Yeah.
Right? Now, again, remember what I said about, say, an academic. It's almost to the point where if you say you're a university professor, it hurts your credibility. And so I would say, all right, he says he's an academic economist. Is he on the faculty of an institution? If so, what institution?
Yeah.
If there's certain buzzwords I hear, London School of Economics, Queen's, or York University, I automatically assume he's an idiot.
Yeah.
Because so many idiots have come out of those faculties. I just trust no one associated with those institutions. If you're a product of that institution, you're full of ideology and bafflegab, and I'm dumber for listening to your stuff.
Yeah.
Getting to that point with the Ivy League. Getting to that point. Getting to, say, that point with some of the institutions or campuses in the University of California. But if he's coming from an institution that, and it depends on the faculty. If you're talking to me about economics and you're from the University of Calgary, I'll listen.
Yeah.
I still think that that's a pretty solid institution.
Right.
If you're talking to me about, say, constitutional law in the United States and you're coming out of Baylor University, that place is the friggin' Marine Corps of law schools, man. I will listen, absolutely. I still consider that to be a reasonable authority.
Right.
Until I hear just too many a parade of idiots. And what I mean by that is not people I disagree with. What I mean by that is people who, like Zihan, who at first I thought were really credible.
Yeah.
But then over the course of time, through two things, they start speaking about something that I do know something about.
Yeah.
Or just over time, say, for example, I don't know a lot about China. I don't pretend to know a lot about China. But I do know that, again, he's been saying there on the 2 years from collapse for the last 20 years. After a certain point, I got to say, okay, Peter, you don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
One of those, until I get to a certain point like that, say with the School of Economics at the University of Calgary, I feel I can still view them as a fairly reasonable source.
Right.
So in the short term, I want to look at this guy, this dude here, unlearning economics guy. He says he's an academic economist. Okay, where? Who is paying you to do what you do? If the answer is nobody, and you're just some guy with a pair of microphones, massive grain of salt on the table, trust but verify.
Yeah.
Or take it face value, but F that. No trust.
Verify.
Take it face value. I once had an instructor at university and I had a lot of bad instructors, but this guy was really good. And he used to say, "In God we trust. Everybody else, bring data."
Oh yeah.
And I kind of approach YouTube.
That's like the old the old journalism school admonition that if your mom says she loves you, you better have three verifiable sources.
Yeah, you better have 3 independent sources. Yeah, it's exactly that thing. And I know a lot of people really freak out about the internet and are very concerned about legitimate, not politically motivated term, but the legitimate use of the term disinformation.
Yeah.
Where people who are not experts just getting on and voicing opinions, and because they have really good production values or that have a great sonorous voice or a good appearance, they attract a following that they maybe don't deserve. And then a really worst case scenario, bad actors such as the Russian government flooding our information space with bad and inaccurate information for nefarious purposes. I know a lot of people get concerned about that.
Yeah.
But I would also say this is absolutely no different than the 30 years period from 1890 to 1920.
Yeah.
We are just in a sorting.
It's one of those history rhyming things again, right?
Yep.
Like
it's
new technology
that
because the printing press
exactly
democratized publishing.
Yep.
Right. As presses got smaller and stuff, and then the internet has taken out another order of magnitude or several orders of magnitude.
There's a channel called What If Alt History. And I've seen some of his stuff. I don't know enough about him to consider him reliable or not. It's all one word. Oh. What if alt hist? Yeah, what if alt hist? There you go. I don't know enough about him to say whether I think he's accurate or not. But he did one that popped up on my feed where he was drawing parallels between today and the era of the 30 Years' War, where he was saying that there's a lot of conditions that really closely match. And he was speaking about topics that I really don't know enough about to call bullshit on or to say, yes, he's right one way or the other.
Yeah.
Like one of the assertions he made was that about how Spain funded their early colonial empire on the massive amounts of silver that they extracted from Central America.
Yeah.
And that when that ran out, or that inflated essentially the precious metals currency market of Europe.
Which was the currency market, basically.
Which was the currency market, yeah. That flooded the availability of currency, creating an inflation. And then when those silver mines were expended, it caused a collapse that was felt all the way in China. Okay, maybe so. But I don't know enough about that period to say yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Or, no, that's bullshit.
Yeah.
So I have to say, well, maybe he's right. Maybe he's not. I'm not going to come down either way on that until I do some more reading on that. And I think part of maybe the concern that people have is that I can access YouTube for free.
Yeah.
I cannot access, by and large, a book on the shelf for free.
No.
Now, I can from the library.
Yeah.
I can,
but the library's limited in what it can have.
The library's limited in what it can have, and it's not instantaneous.
And especially if you're trying like books on history, or you're trying to find something that was published 50 years ago,
it can be harder to do.
It's going to be a lot harder to find.
I got to put some effort into it.
Yeah.
Whereas I can just pull up Wikipedia in 30 seconds.
Yes.
Right? And so I think that's maybe part of the concern. That's part of the new challenge. That internet voices, unqualified voices on the internet can access a much bigger audience than, say, a guy in 1910 who just printed off a community broadsheet or like a single broadsheet within his own municipality.
Yeah.
That, they could possibly do more damage with spreading incorrect information or just factually wrong information to large amounts of people. Yeah, sure. Okay. I get it. That's a legitimate concern. But I also want to say that, like, I'm kind of an optimist. Relax, people. People aren't as dumb as we like to say they are. And really, I'll go even further to say when someone says the average person is stupid or the average person isn't smart enough to tease out the details or look further, investigate further, I take that as code for I'm smarter than everybody else.
Right.
I'm way smarter than the average person. Me, personally. I don't fall to the traps, that the great unwashed peasantry do.
Yeah.
I'm made of finer clay. So I'm really skeptical of people like that.
Yeah, because like one thing I've found myself is that if you give me the right preamble, right, the preamble that checks whatever the box is in my head,
passes the sniff test,
and then you go off on some wild tangent, I'm not going to be able to and say something really wacky. Mm-hmm. If you're good enough, I might not even detect how wacky we are. Yeah. Until I read someone else responding to this and go, "Holy shit, he was right." I can be seduced.
Yeah. I mean, right? And we admit that. But then we also, if it's interesting enough to us and worth our time, which is limited, to actually do that additional homework, then we very quickly learn, okay, is this source reliable or not? Yeah. It's a sorting out process. We're going to be okay. Yeah. And the reaction of the free press, I think, was, it shows the system is working.
Yeah. The one thing I get it. I backtracked earlier. Weiss here, here, she's asserting that what Cooper was saying about the Russian POWs and that stuff was essentially a regurgitation of something Pat Buchanan wrote in Churchill, Hitler, and the Unnecessary War.
Okay. So these are new ideas.
And fair. And Pat Buchanan is kind of a spiritual forefather to that kind of NatCon
MAGA
religious post-liberal right kind of thing. So
sure.
So.
Yeah. I would say that. Yeah, I kind of because I remember looking at an interview with Pat Buchanan some time ago. From Uncommon Knowledge, right? Which is, for my money, one of the best podcasts.
It is very good.
Yeah, because Peter Robinson is such a superb interviewer.
Yes,
and he's so well prepared, which I really enjoy about his stuff.
Yeah.
He's the kind of guy that I think Tucker Carlson wishes he was. Because Tucker Carlson and Robinson both like to say, okay, I'll get my guest on and I'll let them talk.
Yeah.
I'll let them present their own stuff.
Yeah.
The difference is Peter Robinson has done enough homework to know when he's being bullshitted.
Yeah.
Carlson doesn't. Carlson doesn't do the homework.
Yeah.
I sat through every painful second of his interview with Putin. Yeah,
Tucker?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not a solid expert on Eastern Europe, but I know enough about Eastern European history to know that Putin was taking massive liberties.
Sure.
With a historical record.
Yeah, because
it
suits his narrative.
It suits his narrative.
Yeah.
And Carlson, and of course, I hadn't really been exposed to Carlson as an interviewer before that.
Yeah.
I knew him as a commentator.
Yeah, I heard a lot of his
interviewer.
Yeah.
And I didn't have a problem with his commentary. In fact, I thought a lot of his commentary was on point. Like identifying real problems and how the conventional wisdom of today is not adequate to those problems. I thought, yeah, he's on point. But then listening to that interview, oh my God, I was so disappointed. It's like, Carlson, you had a 12-hour plane ride, man. You had time to do some reading. First of all, if he had done any reading on Putin, which he should have, he would have known that Putin likes to wax polemical, that he loves to lecture people on the history and culture of the Russian people and why they are superior.
Well, he even likes to televise the struggle sessions too.
Oh yeah. Yeah, some of those ones, right? You should have known that.
Yeah.
So then you say, okay, I'm going to get something. I got a big plane ride. I got time.
Well, and never mind the weeks leading up to it.
Oh, yeah,
right?
exactly. It's not like that exactly. It's not like we're doing this cram studying for the exam. Yeah, you got weeks leading up to this.
Yeah, it's not like Putin called these people and said, hey, if you can be here tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. He had time to say, okay, I'm going to read up on Russian history, Eastern European history, Polish, Czech, Ukrainian, Latvian, Finnish history as it pertains to the Russians, So that way I got an idea. There's no way Putin could have got away with that on an interview with Robinson.
No.
Robinson would have called him out on it. Say, whoa, what you're saying here, that's just not true. Or, where do you get that?
Yeah.
Whereas Carlson couldn't. He had no way. Like, he was completely ignorant.
Well,
so all he could do is let Putin spew.
And Robinson would have quoted Putin section from minor section from his book.
On your speech, after signing the 1991 Budapest Memorandum, where you promised to hold the territorial integrity of Ukraine inviolate, how do you reconcile those two, what you just said now with what you said back then?
Yeah.
Where's the schism? And then he mentions what Putin said in 1994.
Yeah.
When Ukraine handed over the last of its nuclear weapons. Like, how do you do this? Whereas Carlson, he could do that, but he doesn't.
No.
He just doesn't put
I don't know if he's clever enough.
Well, it could be.
Right? Because,
could be.
The posts he made, or when he went to the Russian grocery store to get food for the troops or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Oh, everything's cheap. Okay, do you know what a Russian makes, right?
Yeah, exactly.
My friend Heather figured this out when she went to the Czech Republic and was talking to locals of the Czech. She went to this restaurant that she thought was pretty cheap and it was great and the food was really good. And he was talking to locals like, I can't afford to eat there.
Like the locals can't afford.
Couldn't afford to eat at this restaurant.
Oh, to her it was cheap.
It was cheap,
but to the locals it was totally out of reach.
It was out of reach. Yeah, exactly. Wow. Yeah,
yeah. So maybe that grocery store he went to had a very, very like Whole Foods.
No, literally, people ran the numbers. He's like, oh, okay, well here's the food, and and when you do the exchange, it's cheap. Sure.
Yeah.
Right. Whatever, ground beef was, half the price or even a third of the price of what is in the U.S.
Yeah.
But then, when you start crunching, what is the average Russian take home per month? It's expensive. It's more expensive for the average Russian than it is
for the average American.
Than it is for the average American. Sure. Yeah. Just because they just make less.
Yeah, they just make less. Yeah,
right?
It's all economies of scale.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, the food is cheaper, but from a Russian perspective, it's actually more expensive.
Yeah. Was he comparing it, not to the United States, but was he comparing it to, say, what a journeyman tradesman makes in Russia? He was.
Well, he didn't compare it to what Russia.
He
just buy American. He literally just ran the exchange rate.
Yeah.
Basically, this is cheap. This ground beef, which is $4 a pound at home or whatever, is $1 a pound here. Well, that's cheap.
Just like
it's cheap for you.
Yeah. If I run the exchange rate, gasoline in Mexico is way cheaper than it is here.
Exactly. Right.
But there's a reason why.
Yeah, the only place in the world I found where gasoline is actually really cheap for the people who live there is Kuwait.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
Right,
because they don't tax it near as much, and I think I just think they just don't tax it.
Well, because they own it,
and it's super cheap for them.
They own it, so they're making the money off it. Right, everything is state owned.
It's so shallow and it's so light and sweet. It takes very little refining. And
but it's owned by the government right up to the point where it goes in somebody else's gas tank anyway, so they're making the money.
Yeah,
so they don't have to tax it.
They'd be
taxing themselves.
Exactly. They just cover the costs, and here you go.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, So, I can see this as being kind of disillusioning because there were certain things I really liked about Cooper.
Yeah,
and does he narrate his own podcast?
Oh yeah.
See, I loved his voice.
He's got a great podcasting voice. Yeah.
Oh, he was fantastic. His delivery when he spoke to Carlson.
Yeah.
So few word whiskers, so few awkward pauses.
Yeah.
And that was just him winging it.
Mm-hmm.
If he was scripted and he knew what he wanted to say in advance, I bet you his delivery would be fantastic.
It is.
So enjoyable to listen to.
I can tell you firsthand it is. But.
Yeah, his cadence, his intonation, the melodic tone of his voice would be great.
Yeah.
So I can see how his shit would be enjoyable. And stuff like that is, I bet you it's kind of like for me when I hear a recording artist and I really like the music that I hear from them.
Mm-hmm.
Say I've heard 2 songs and I really like them. I love the melodic scheme. I love the chord progression. I love the production. I love the lyrics. And then I find out that this artist is a total asshole. That they're just cruel to their band members or their road staff, or to the staff, in the venues that host him when he's playing, that he's just a thoroughly disagreeable, repugnant personality.
Yeah.
It makes it really, really, really difficult for me to separate the art from the artist. Mm-hmm. But I feel a profound sense of disappointment.
Yeah.
Same thing with an athlete. If I love an athlete's product on the field or on the ice, like in their sport,
Yeah.
I feel a profound disappointment and a sense of loss if I find out that they have something else that's a really negative characteristic.
Yeah.
Maybe that's similar to what you were feeling with this. Like, you really enjoyed that product
absolutely,
so well for so many reasons that there is a sense of loss if you are now having to question the validity of that product.
Yeah.
Maybe that's, maybe there's a part of that.
Oh, I'm sure it is, right? I try and figure out, one of the things I think about is like, so when people I follow or like and enjoy say things that are kind of weird, what kind of mental gymnastics do I have to do?
Right.
To make
to
this,
square that circle.
To square it, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I started thinking about this actually with Jordan Peterson.
Right.
Right? Because like a mutual friend of ours, the co-host of the other podcast that we did together.
Yep.
He said he never liked Jordan Peterson. He said, I saw him say two things and I believed them both to be wrong. So I never followed him.
So I never really went.
I don't follow him. I think he's, right.
Yeah.
But myself and Trent, and maybe to a lesser extent you, think that Peterson is generally a pretty, not a great interviewer, but a good commentator.
Terrible interviewer. Oh my God.
But he does, well, my squaring of that circle is that he's not doing interviews. He's just having conversations.
I guess.
Right.
Yeah. Fair enough.
So if you look at it as a conversation, it's not an interview. And we're just
fair enough.
talking,
Yeah. And it's a conversation that he's going to dominate.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
And again, that doesn't mean I don't get good content out of it.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that I don't still watch it if he's got a guest that I'm interested in.
Exactly, right? Yeah.
It just sometimes I wish he would shut up and let the other guy talk for a little bit, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. There are things that I do not agree with on Peterson at all.
Yeah.
But on balance, I think his observations are sound.
Yeah. And yeah, like his presence in the world of the commentary, it is beneficial.
Yeah.
Is positive.
And I'll even go so far as to say that about Carlson.
Okay.
There's a lot about Carlson I do like. Don't get me started on his views on the war in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Do not get me started. I think he is as wrong can be.
Absolutely.
He could not be more wrong if he tried.
Yeah.
But I sat through the full recordings of his speeches in Edmonton and Calgary. I don't have a problem with his content.
Well, I had a big problem with one of the things he said. I didn't listen to the speeches, but when he was doing the on-stage portion, I think it was from the Edmonton one, when somebody asked him, and we talked about this on a previous podcast, when somebody asked him about building a wall between Canada and the U.S.
Oh.
And his thing.
Oh, yeah, I was like, yeah, hell yeah. Didn't he say he wanted to or something like that?
He said it would benefit Canada, right? Because it would keep...
Refresh me.
Okay, so somebody asked him about building a wall between Canada and the U.S. And he's like, it would benefit Canada because it would stop the flight of all your elites going to the States.
Oh, right.
And I was like...
Yes, now I recall.
Well, that's... Okay, so that pissed me off because, I went like four steps beyond that. Yeah. Okay, well, the elites aren't, one, they're not walking across the border. They're taking planes. You're going to have to build a pretty fucking tall wall. Yeah. And that wall is going to have to be legal. Yeah. So it means you have to build basically the legal framework of turning Canada into East Germany.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
That's what that looks like. So that's like... Yeah. To me, what I don't like about Carlson, I'm like, you don't have to poke him very hard to define the authoritarian inside him.
Oh, no. And this is what Goodwin was talking about with nationalist conservatives.
Yeah.
In that...
Well, it's post-liberal, so it's not... It's
They have absolutely no problem with the state regulating vast amounts of private life.
Well, and a bunch of them, there's a religious sect who think the United States should be a Roman Catholic state.
Yep.
Right?
They have no problem with using the power of the state to impose their views of morality upon the population.
Yes.
They have no problem. Like, it's...
and that's actually... That... Mm-hmm. what I view as the intellectual dishonesty of that position is why I left conservatism to become libertarian. Because I used to be what I think of as a bad conservative, freedom for me but not for thee.
Right.
Conservative.
Yeah, like
to me that was just too hypocritical.
Tucker Carlson has the exact same views about governance of the internet as Canada's Liberal Party.
Yeah.
The only difference is the material that they're going to censor.
Yeah.
But they both feel that censorship is absolutely necessary and good. It's just that they disagree on what should be censored.
Yeah.
It's like my beef with DEI. It's like both they and say David Duke both feel that race has direct influence on behavior.
Yeah.
And that you can tell everything you need to know about a person by the color of their skin.
Yeah.
And that your color of your skin is far more important than your individual thoughts, ideas, behaviors, and beliefs. Mm-hmm. It's just that they disagree on who the subhuman race is. They both are clearly racist. It's just that they disagree as to what the superior race is and what the inferior race is.
Yeah.
They're both subscribing to the same theory. So yeah, that's a huge issue that I have with nationalist conservatives. But I don't think their views should be banned.
No.
Drag them out into the public square,
well,
and expose them for what they are.
I would encourage you to actually finish listening to that or watching.
I will. I do want to, because I do want to see what their opinions are on immigration.
Oh yeah,
because I think that is the defining issue of 2024, 2025.
They go into it.
Yeah, and I definitely want to hear what they have to say about that.
They go into it, and it's certainly you and I wouldn't disagree with all of it.
Right.
I don't think we'd even disagree with most of it.
Exactly.
Some of it, there's
because they are not relying on historical interpretation. They're looking at what's happening in real time.
Yes. Right. Where was I going to go?
We were talking about.
I
don't even know.
Yeah, because you talked about immigration. I was going to mention something else they were saying in the podcast
that Carlson and Cooper were saying.
Yeah.
About
right. Cooper was saying how it's essentially been illegal in his view because he's using a more classical definition of right wing. Mm-hmm. How since the Second World War, it's essentially been illegal in the West to be right wing.
Right.
What we call right wing now, or in the post World War II era, is really a form of liberalism.
Sure.
Right.
Yep.
And so.
And I don't think he's without foundation there.
No, I didn't think.
Yeah, illegal.
Well, in some places it is because he's saying. I mean, this is where I think
was he talking about Germany and how, say, for example, they're trying to ban the AfD?
No, well, he wasn't talking about currently because
he's talking more about, like, say, the 60s and 70s.
Like to what you would call right wing prior to the Second World War.
Okay.
Essentially became illegal because, and I think this is where you and I would disagree because we don't not with each other but with him because I mean we did a whole episode on how
is he defining right wing?
Well, he doesn't get into, but it's different. Obviously, it's different from how we define it now. I'm like, if he's like accepting the conventional fascism is right wing,
okay,
which we've had an entire episode that we argued on that.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's where he's coming from, right? Fascism, nationalism,
right?
Strict nationalism, that's kind of right wing,
okay.
Right?
Again, I personally reject that wholesale.
Yeah.
I see fascism and National Socialism as products of the left.
Yeah.
Although I admit I am in the minority view on that.
Well, and I share the view with you, but we're both
I haven't read Goldberg's book on that yet, but it's number 2 on my reading list of forbidden books that would probably get me fired if they knew I was reading them. So,
which book is that?
Goldberg's book, Liberal Fascism.
Jonah Goldberg.
Jonah Goldberg, yeah. Okay. Where he presents
that. Really fire you for reading Jonah Goldberg?
Oh yeah, I get totally.
I get that it's not the chief of defense staff's reading.
Yeah, exactly. To say that, like, just to argue the premise that that the Nazis and the fascists were products of the left,
Yeah.
yeah, it would probably get me sunk. Right now, I'm reading Grave Error, which is
That's
the collection of essays that is critical of the current narrative of
the
residential
mass
schools.
graves.
Yeah.
The residential school mass graves. thing,
Yes. Thoroughly enjoying it.
Yeah.
Really interesting. The chapter I'm on right now talks about Peter Bryce, who is celebrated, who's celebrated in Canada by, I guess what you'd say is like, I guess you'd say like the revisionist, and I don't mean that as a pejorative. What I mean by revisionist faction is the people who are saying, hey, we need to re-examine. We need to really take the rose-colored glasses off when we look at the history of residential schools and see them, with full acceptance of the incredible negativity that happened there. So I don't mean that as a shot. What I mean is just that when I say the revisionist historians, it was the people who, say maybe 15, 20 years ago, were saying, hey, we need to challenge the narrative, the accepted, or maybe not, the benign ignorance of residential schools. Peter Bryce is celebrated by that community because he wrote a report in the early 1920s that was incredibly critical of health conditions in the residential schools.
Right.
And he's seen today as something of a whistleblower. Well, the book is kind of saying, okay, does Bryce, really, let's look at what he wrote and how a lot of the opinions he had. Would they get him canceled today? Like we're only looking, when we celebrate Bryce, we're only looking at a very narrow field of his work.
Right.
Some of the other broader stuff he said, like for example, he said health outcomes were much better on the Six Nations reserves in Eastern Canada than they were on the Treaty 6, 7, and 8 reserves because there was more interbreeding with white people. And that white DNA had made them more civilized and better off. And that's why their populations were
Doing better.
doing better, is because they had more. So definitely says it's an assimilationist effect, but he also really kind of says, yeah, it's a genetic effect. Oh my God, can you imagine? Holy jeez. Can you imagine saying that now? I mean, that would get, if can you imagine if such a statement had been accredited to John A. Macdonald?
Oh yeah, it would be.
Oh my God. There would be like,
I was going to say, didn't they already tear down a statue of his anyway?
Oh yeah, they would be going nuts. So yeah, I'm enjoying that chapter where it's taking a look at a very closer look at Bryce.
Yeah.
And saying, was he really a whistleblower? Did he do this out of purely altruistic reasons, or did he have an axe to grind because he was really, really, really upset about the failure of his own career to dominate, or the attempts within his own professional career to dominate the Department of Indian Affairs.
Right.
So yeah, like it was, not all of the chapters are strictly about the failure of to find any bodies.
Yeah.
At Calisas or Kamloops First Nations, where ground penetrating radar has
Shown disturbances.
disturbance in the soil, and how not a single body has been found anywhere.
Yeah.
Most of the chapters really go into depth into that, and also how various First Nations and say a lot of lobbies, like say legal firms who are seeking to represent First Nations, or academics who are seeking to become guardians of the information. In other words, academics who want to hold all of the records, and so then you have to pay them to get access to it, right? Like people have various own personal agendas. How they are not only have they not found any evidence, they're making it impossible for anyone to find any evidence.
Yeah.
Most of the chapters are about that, but this one chapter I'm finishing now on Bryce is, I'd I had heard of the guy once,
Yeah.
but I really didn't know anything about him. And then to read this, it's quite interesting. I like how selective, because he's regarded as a hero within the revisionist camp, but so selective
Of what they publish.
he could be just as easily regarded as a total villain,
Yeah.
as a vile racist, depending on, like, there's a lot less evidence for Johnny McDonald being a racist. He's a racist because they say he's a racist.
Yeah.
In spite of everything where there are many instances of where he was genuinely trying to help and support First Nations in the context of the times. Where, you don't have a statement by Johnny McDonald saying that, these guys are an inferior, stock of human beings and they have to be assimilated into, a superior British, breeding stock. Like, no, you don't get any of those statements. But we're expected to believe that McDonald was racist because they tell us that he's racist.
Yeah.
And that going back to the stuff that Cooper and Carlson were saying at the very beginning of the interview, that is something that needs to be considered. The institutions that we used to trust, and I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier, like academia, like legacy media, have very much discredited themselves. Mm-hmm. And it's all fine and dandy for people in those institutions to criticize YouTube and to criticize social media and podcasts as being, like, look, these guys are irresponsible. They have no credentials. We have no way of knowing whether or not they're telling us the truth.
Yeah.
Well, we have no way of knowing whether or not a university professor is telling us the truth.
Yeah.
And that's a perfect example of the hysteria and the moral panic that arose in Canada over the residential schools, promoted by these institutions that we used to trust.
Yes.
Where the media lied to us, flat out, didn't even make an effort to get to the truth, and presented a narrative that after the first 6 months, everybody knew was false. Yet they still promoted it.
Mm-hmm. And they're still promoting it.
And they're still promoting it.
Right to this day, right?
Because there's benefits to them, right?
Yeah.
And that ties in. If you don't like guys like Daryl Cooper doing what he does, and you're in the mainstream media, or you're in mainstream academia, or you're in mainstream publishing, or a mainstream broadcast, well, that's media, well, then clean up your own damn act.
Yeah.
And if you do that, there won't be any room for guys like Daryl Cooper to do what they do. Mm-hmm. It's the fact that they opened the door. Cooper just walked through it.
Yeah.
That, like as Weiss points out with Buchanan in his writings.
Yeah.
These ideas are not new. These have been around for a long time. It's only the decay in our traditional institutions and their corruption that we're in this situation now. That we have to discover new institutions that we trust.
Yeah. Well, I think maybe we're done now with the death. You want to talk about German elections?
Sure. What do you want to know? Or what do you want to cover? There's quite a few, isn't there?
Sure, but I don't really know anything. I know you mentioned, hey, there's German elections and there's some pretty surprising results. So enlighten me.
The elections in Thüringen and Sachsen, or Thuringia and Saxony in Germany, produced really surprising results. Now, Germany has something wrong technically?
No.
Okay. Germany has a federal system where you have the federal parliament in Berlin, mm-hmm. and which has certain responsibilities, and then you have you could translate it to provinces mm-hmm. or states,
right,
that have their responsibilities. One of the things that I think is really interesting and unique about the German system is that certain cities are their own provinces.
Right.
So, like, for example, in our system, mm-hmm. Toronto dominates Ontario.
Yes.
Dominates Ontario politics.
Right.
And it carries the day in everything that happens in Queen's Park. Mm-hmm. And you know what? Sault Ste. Marie could just slide off the shore into the lake and no one would notice.
Yeah.
You know, Thunder Bay could blow up And it would be 3 weeks before anyone in the Ontario legislature figured it out, because the urban area of Toronto dominates it to such an extent.
Yeah.
And there's lots of jurisdictions, well, like say the UK. London dominates
everything
to such a massive perspective that it just sucks up all the oxygen in the room.
Yeah.
The German system attempts to recognize that.
Right.
And it says, okay, Hamburg, Bremen, Berlin, these cities are so big that rather than have them dominate the areas, the surroundings, we'll make them their own states
Right.
in the federal structure. And I think that's a really interesting, way of addressing that problem. So it's an interesting system. The party, the AfD, or the Alternative for Germany, it translated into English, is a populist party, and they're essentially a one issue party. Immigration.
Right.
They talk a little bit about law and order, but when you listen to them talk for 30 seconds, it just goes back to immigration.
They think all the law and order issues are related to immigration.
Exactly. If we clean up immigration, we're not going to have to worry about law and order so much, because it's immigrants committing all the crimes.
Yeah.
Right? They are a one-trick pony.
Right.
And they are despised by the German political establishment, right and left. Or what passes, like the whole Overton window of German politics is far to the left.
Yeah.
Compared to, say, Canada. But even what is considered to be the right wing in German politics, say the Christian Democrats, until very recently, no, we will absolutely, or even right now, no, will not work with the AfD and will not coalition with them. And the story of the AfD has been their gradual increase in popularity, simply because, and this is the story of populism everywhere. Populism only exists when the established political force, or the political establishment, refuses to acknowledge a certain issue.
Yeah.
And so these fringe elements show up. And what is really remarkable is that in Saxony, I believe the AfD has the single largest share. And so it's possible that every other party across the political spectrum, from the former communists to the Greens to the Social Democrats to the Christian Democrats, will all band together to form a coalition to keep the AfD out.
Similar to what happened in France.
Except they didn't need any input from the right-wing parties. In France, the left could do it all on their own.
Right. Okay.
So it was the entire spectrum of the political left uniting.
Right.
Moderate left to out of their minds, moonbat, nut bar Stalinists finding common ground to keep the Front National out of office.
Right.
That's not going to work in Saxony, because the number 2 party is the Christian Democrats.
Which is a conservative.
Which is a nominally conservative. It is closer to the right of the political spectrum.
Right.
So this is going to be really difficult to work some kind of coalition to keep the AfD out. What's also really interesting is how the AfD has captured the Gen Z vote.
Right.
They took something like 38% of the vote share all by themselves for people under the age of 25.
Wow.
There is a mass disillusionment with immigration. And I think that's the only conclusion you can draw. A vote for AfD is an anti-immigration vote. That's it. You cannot make a statement as to what environmental policy, because the AfD is kind of against net zero and all that good stuff. They're kind of against early, like the softness on crime and this sort of thing.
Right.
They talk about, in their manifesto, they talk a little bit about liberalizing the economy and, say, having less regulation. But when you see them in their, when they're knocking on doorsteps, immigration. Everything else is window dressing to the immigration issue.
Right.
That's what I mean. They're a one-trick pony. So it shows that the youth vote is incredibly rejecting immigration and multiculturalism. When people in the UK talk about Blair's New Labour, People in Germany talk about Angela Merkel and her immigration policy.
Right.
It's a complete and total rejection of that.
Right.
And it's going to be, the shot has been fired across the bow. And now that, or maybe it's more like the dam is broken, and the taboo has been taken off of the AFD. Part of the complicating factor is that both Thuringia and Saxony were former East Germany.
Right.
And there is a backlash within East Germany on wokeism because as a lot of commentators have said, they find it way too reminiscent of the DDR time.
Right.
Where the state and its various the apparatuses of the executive branch say, okay, this is the narrative that you're going to use for everything. We're going to tell you what you think about everything. You speak publicly, this is what you're going to say. And they find the modern woke, and I shouldn't say woke, I'm just going to say the dominant discourse on immigration and multiculturalism, just like here in Canada. You speak publicly on these things until October 7th. Say, October 6th, 2024, until that date and earlier. You speak about immigration, you better talk about it in terms of an unqualified good, or you're going to lose your job.
Yeah.
You're going to lose your job. You're probably going to lose your apartment. You might find that your bank doesn't want to work with you anymore. Like there was a massive taboo on it. And again, this is what I think Carlson and Cooper were talking about when they said it was illegal to question certain narratives.
Yeah.
Maybe not illegal, but you would get canceled for it.
Yeah.
Like there was definite quasi-legal repercussions for it.
Yeah.
Well, that has always kept a lid. That taboo has always kept a lid on how far into the mainstream guys like AFD could go. But now that the dam is broken in Eastern Germany, probably because of the history of Eastern Germany and the sensitivity of the population there to items of censorship, there's going to be further state elections within Germany in the next few months. It's going to be interesting.
Cooper actually talks about that later in towards the end of their comment or discussion of immigration, which kind of is the rest of the podcast. But he talks about not necessarily the reasoning. He's looking at the causation differently. He points the same narrative. The former, Warsaw, the nations behind the Iron Curtain. Yeah. They're not as susceptible to this, the pro-immigration, the typical narrative in the West.
The pro-immigration narrative,
yeah. And he makes the cause of, okay, well, they were protected from, he blames it on the U.S. basically as like U.S. foreign policy people basically imposing their will on Western Europe and
very Russian argument.
Yeah, exactly. Very Russian argument. He basically makes the Russian argument
talking point. Yeah.
And so they're protected from that because, of course, they're dominated by Russia. But
right.
Whereas I find like what you articulated to be more compelling is that these people have, they already know what it's like to have the state impose a narrative on them that they don't want it anymore.
And they're very wary of that.
Yeah.
Very mistrustful of that. Another thing that I find really interesting is the upcoming BC election and the resurgence of the BC Conservatives.
Yeah.
Where these guys have been in the wilderness since 53?
Yeah, unless you count the Socreds, but yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah,
and I don't count the Socreds. Yeah, when W.A.C. Bennett came in, there were even elections, and I think in the 1960s and 70s, where the BC Conservative Party did not even run candidates.
Yeah.
They were completely moribund as a political force. And they only really reformed and revived in the last year.
Yeah, maybe two. But
and just I don't know, man. If you had come to me 4 months ago and said that a conservative party could win an election in British Columbia, I'd have laughed at you.
Yeah, it's kind of astounding, right?
I would have scoffed at you. Get serious. Come on. This is the most hard left jurisdiction. The BC Interior.
Yeah.
Separate matter.
Yeah.
Okay. But the BC Interior has always been very blue collar.
Yeah.
Very conservative.
It's culturally Alberta.
Small. Yes, exactly. Small C conservative, culturally Albertan.
Yeah.
It's just that, again, the big city problem, Vancouver and Victoria
Suck up all the oxygen.
have dominated everything, and they are a product, or they are very, very keyed into the modern progressive agenda. They're upper income, very wealthy, largely dominated by government, the extended public sector, so they're immune to the economic consequences of progressive policy. Mm-hmm. And when you're rich enough, you don't really care what happens on the Lower East Side. You live in White Rock, man. Like, you live in the Tony neighborhoods that
or you live across the inlet in North Van or whatever.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Yeah.
So,
but I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if whatever the ridings, especially federally, whatever riding is responsible for the actual downtown, because there's a lot of residential apartments.
Sure. Yeah.
If that maybe goes conservative.
Well,
just because those people do have to, even though those people are wealthier,
they got to step over it. Yeah.
When you got
and their houses are getting broken into.
Yeah.
By drug addicts, right? But
like the people who live in the apartment blocks are probably not.
From what I've been reading, that these large areas that used to be very blue collar NDP have gentrified, and have now become upper income white collar. And so they stayed orange, but the demographic of that NDP support is completely different.
Yeah.
And that now the lower end of the upper income white collar. In other words, the ultra rich are always going to be NDP.
Yeah.
Always. But the guys who maybe 10 years ago, they could use their income to insulate themselves from the problems progressivism has caused.
Yeah.
Things have gone down far enough now that now they can't.
Yeah, or the problems are getting more expensive.
Right. Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. The problems are getting more and more expensive. So now it's starting to erode that lowest couple of tiers of progressive support. Votes that would go to the Greens, that would go to the NDP. And so now they're looking for an alternative. And BC United, which was that middle of the road moderate kind of faction, simply wasn't getting it done. Like Progressive Light. People were no longer content to say we're going to choose between progressive parties and moderately progressive parties. We're done with that. We want something completely different. And Rustad has, he's broken all the rules. He said, I'm going to scrap the carbon tax, BC's carbon tax.
Yeah.
No, net zero is stupid. That's why he ended up a conservative.
Yeah.
Because he questioned the whole global warming narrative.
Yeah.
And that's what got him booted out of the BC United Caucus. So he said, okay, I'm going to be an independent. And he would not retract that. And then from there, he said, okay, Conservative Party really is me. So I'm going to be a conservative, right?
Yeah.
And so he basically created his own party. It's kind of like Indian motorcycles, right? Like, Polaris, that's a name that people recognize. We'll buy it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what he did. That's a name people recognize. I'll buy it.
After like the sixth time somebody tried to resurrect Indian, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So not a perfect analogy, but
it might be better. Like how many times have people tried to resurrect BC Conservatives?
I guess, yeah. Right? But like Polaris, they're actually producing a product that has a demand.
Yeah.
And so then there were other defections from BC United towards the Conservatives, and they've discovered their voice, and their message is timely now because BC's a mess.
Yeah.
Not only have they so bureaucratized their healthcare, they paralyzed it with red tape.
Yeah.
That was half of it. The other half was Bonnie Henry's insistence that if you don't get the vax, you're going to get fired.
Yeah.
And so they laid off thousands of healthcare providers that they could not afford to lose. And hospitals are closing.
Yeah.
Like here in Alberta, people complain that, wait times. In BC, they're closing the hospital for 2 weeks at a time.
Yeah, because they don't have staff.
Because they don't have staff. Again, it's like, look, every measure you want, compare Alberta and BC straight up. Any metric you want.
Yeah.
BC's doing worse. with the possible exception of how much their senior public servants are getting paid, right? BC's doing better than that.
Yeah.
But I find it really interesting that, again, I thought BC was this impenetrable fortress of progressivism. And in the same way that, say, Detroit was, New York was, California was, that no matter how bad things got, people would never turn away from that political identity.
Yeah.
But now it seems that at least some of them are.
Yeah.
And that to me is, wow, that's seismic.
I'm curious if, using the California example, if Southern California, San Francisco,
Yeah.
it seems like the Democrats still have a really rock solid grip right now.
They do.
But
Yeah. They do.
I'm like, it's gonna get, eventually it's gonna get to the point where, like, you know, because even though, like, LA's homeless problem, like when Red McCauley was there, he's saying, like, you know, any underpass, there's an encampment under basically every underpass in the greater Los Angeles area.
Yeah.
So it's not just confined to Skid Row, but it's still,
The whole city is Skid Row.
yeah,
The whole city.
but it's still, nobody can make inroads,
No.
right?
Well,
Like, from the right can make inroads. San Francisco, that has an, you know, has an app to tell you where the poop are, where the human poop is, right? Like,
like all of these deep blue cities,
Yeah.
Portland, Seattle, the California seaboard, all of these places, you've had the destruction of the middle class.
yeah,
And I'll say I use that term in the North American context, maybe say to the broader English-speaking context, the prosperous working class.
yeah,
Like it's a collapse of the prosperous working class. So now you have two groups of people. You've got the very wealthy and you've got the destitute. And there's nobody in the middle.
Yeah.
It's a medieval society. Well, as long as it's still functioning and you're the aristocrats in a medieval society, why would you change?
yeah,
As long as it's still working. The only time those guys are disillusioned is when they're removed from the aristocracy.
yeah,
Well, like say there's a new aristocracy comes in and kills their king and disenfranchises them and puts in their nobility over the estates that they own.
yeah,
If you are, odds are if you're voting blue in the in one of these deep blue cities, I'm going to say that you are in one of two constituencies. Two constituencies. If you're actively voting blue, you're rich.
yeah,
And you benefit from the current system as it is. Or you're very young and you are still the product of 12 to 14 or 16 years, depending on the route you took, of indoctrination through public education and legacy media.
yeah,
And that is enough of, you're probably a little bit over 50% of the population in just those two groups. And so long as there's continually new cohorts of young people replacing the ones who then, they turn 28, 29, 30, 32, and then they realize that this isn't working so well anymore, but they are so indoctrinated in it, they will never vote against the Democrats because everything they've been told all their lives is that the Republicans are evil,
yeah,
but they won't vote for the Democrats. They'll just stay home. They just drop out. And then a new cohort of young, freshly indoctrinated people turns 18 to replace them. Only when that rejuvenation process fails might we see a change.
I was thinking this week, just in my continually adding to things I put on my dream constitution.
Oh, yeah.
I might raise the voting age to 40, maybe 45.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah, I can see that. Well, I think that's why progressives are seeking to lower the voting age.
Yeah,
And I wonder if maybe our demographic shift has got something to do with that. There are fewer and fewer younger voters coming up. Every year, fewer people are turning 18.
yeah,
And it's not the automatic electoral shot in the arm that it used to be. And so they're thinking, well, we need, if we increase that young, inexperienced in life cohort.
it still only helps you like for one cycle.
It only helps you for one cycle. The other thing is, the other problem that you're seeing now in Germany, that you're seeing in Canada, is that Gen Z is turning away from progressivism.
Yeah,
And I think, this was predicted.
and it's been a trend that people have been noticing for at least 5 years
Yeah,
now.
it was predicted like 20 years ago.
Yeah,
that this will be the generation that grew up knowing nothing but the ascendancy, the high watermark of progressivism.
Yeah.
And they've never known anything other than progressivism.
Yeah.
And all they know is that progressivism does not work.
So, and that kind of worries me because, as a libertarian or a classical liberal, right?
Yep.
Like, I appreciate liberalism in the small L form.
Yep.
I don't want Gen Z to go, well, isn't that progressivism? And now we should look at fascism. Oh,
Right. And this is the danger.
Look at China's employment rate or whatever,
that
right?
They can be seduced by the far radical left.
Or the far radical right.
Well, if they're already being seduced by conservatives, that's already happening.
Yeah.
But they could be seduced by the hard,
By communists.
psychopathic, murderous moonbat left. The Stalinists. The Che Guevara types.
Yeah.
Say, look, man, we just got to start killing more people to make them listen to us.
That's my joke. Is I'm intellectually libertarian, but I'm emotionally Stalinist. When I have an emotional reaction to something, like
Kill them.
I want him killed, I want him punished, I want his family punished, I want their line erased from the earth, right? Like,
shoot them, build a family for the bullets. That's pretty harsh. Pretty harsh.
Yeah, so I try not to let my emotional side win because my emotional side is a little Stalinist, but my intellectual side is libertarian. So I try and keep it focused.
So it's gonna I find that really interesting. But like the BC elections, I don't know I don't know of any other major elections going on beyond the American one. In federal politics, I know people were really excited, or just not excited, but like, oh my God. End of the supply and confidence agreement.
Yeah.
Is this the end of the Liberal Democrats as a coalition? And I say, nope, no, it's not.
Yeah.
I think this is a massive nothing burger. It's just that the new Democrats recognize that the Liberals are political liability.
Yeah. So they just need to rhetorically distance themselves.
They want to create the appearance of distance.
Yeah.
But in truth, they are still welded together at the hip.
Yeah.
And
it's too bad. I would like an election before next October when the deadline on the order in council runs out and I got to turn my guns. So.
Or, well, I don't know. I don't know if they'll be able to do that. But I know what you're saying. It's just that who benefits from an election other than the Conservatives right now?
Yeah, nobody.
Nobody. Yeah. The Bloc certainly doesn't.
No.
I mean, if you go to the polls right now, they're going to lose seats to the Conservatives.
Yeah.
So I forget the name of the leader of the Bloc, the guy with the little scrunched up face. He absolutely will prop up the Liberals.
Yeah.
If nobody else does, he'll prop them up. If you're the Greens and they're like all of 3 seats, you do not.
3 or 2? Yeah.
You don't want an election right now.
No.
Because you're probably they're still trying to get their electoral act together. They're probably going to lose what they got.
Yeah.
At least if you delay until summer 2025, things probably aren't going to get any better, but at least there's a mathematical chance.
Yeah.
There's no way you're going to retain party status if you go to the polls now. If you're the New Democratic Party, you're broke.
Yeah.
You got no money. You haven't been able to raise any money. Jagmeet Singh was a spectacular failure as a leader.
Absolutely.
I mean, I know where they got him. Visible minority, good-looking guy.
Yeah.
A really handsome guy. Dresses impeccably. Like, he was the Trudeau effect.
But he dresses rich, right? Like, which I guess is their support. But when you're supposed to be the party that appeals to the working class, even if you don't anymore. But
they haven't been that in 20 years.
I guess.
But
rhetorically, they always say they are.
They like to think of themselves that way.
Right, but yeah.
But again, he was dressing to... I mean, a guy in flannels is not going to win the New Democrat vote base or the progressive vote base. It won't. You need a guy who's dressed like a corporate lawyer.
Yeah, well, because the vote base isn't what they say the vote base is, right?
Right.
Isn't what they say who they say they're.
Yeah.
I would love to see
the way they like to think of themselves. Is not who they really are.
I would love to see voter preference breakdowns by income.
Oh yeah,
right,
dude. You know what it would be.
Yeah, anybody who's in 5 digits
is
voting conservative, right?
No, 5 digits.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
and then
Totally.
then the division. So
6 and up.
So the six. That's where the election is won or lost. Is the six is
6 and up.
is finding the 6-digit people, right?
Yeah, exactly. And at what point the 6-digit transitions from red to orange?
Yeah.
And I think
so you get those big concentrations.
I think there's like hard orange at the beginning of 6-digit, starts to go red, and then as you go further up, starts to go orange again.
Yeah, and it's probably actually even in the 5-digit people, right? Like probably still the people in the bottom 5 digits. You know, the right 20,000.
Or like less than 30.
Yeah, less than 30. Those
they might be more orange red.
Yeah,
because they perceive that as being the security for.
But I think those are the people
welfare
that
state,
they're definitely changing as well, though.
I think so too. As well, we're in this problem now where it doesn't matter whether or not this politician says that I'm going to protect the welfare state.
Yeah.
The welfare state's not working.
Yeah,
like government itself. It's not that there's no money going into the programs. There is.
Yeah.
The programs themselves are not functioning.
Yeah.
Like we are paying more money into public swimming pools now than we ever have before. The problem is not staffing. The problem is not funding. But we can't keep our pools open.
Yeah.
Or it's not that our schools are better funded and better staffed now than they ever have been in their in history. But they're dysfunctional. Mm-hmm. They're not working. Like I just heard the story the other day of in Britannia Junior High here in Edmonton. They've got a program for like disturbed students.
Right.
Like in other words, behavioral problem students.
Right.
And Britannia has a bit of a reputation, like because there's a lot of funding attached.
Right.
To these kids.
Right.
Britannia has a bit of a reputation of saying that they'll take pretty much anybody because they can use the slush funding that's supposed to go into programming for behaviorally disturbed kids, and they just use it as in general revenue.
Right.
This one kid, this is the story. Grapevine. I haven't seen this officially reported, so take it with a grain of salt. Mm-hmm. But there's apparently one kid who's been a repeated disciplinary problem, and the kid's like over 6 feet. He's 15, but he's bigger than a grown man.
Right.
Broke the leg of another student.
Oh, good Lord.
Yeah, like in a out physical assault, broke the leg. 0 ramifications. 0 consequence. 0. And that teachers have like the place has an incredible turnover in its staff because teachers and staff go in there like, I'm physically in danger here.
It's chaos.
Yeah. And there's violent assaults of the teachers from students all the time. And okay, why? What's causing this? It's not lack of funding. It's not that we don't have enough teachers. All the talking points of the teachers union, throw them out the door. Mm-hmm. There's a rot within our executive branch, within the functioning of the welfare state. So the people who are at the very, very bottom of the income pyramid, who say, 20, 30 years ago could be reliably Liberal Democrat voters because it was a way to protect their access to those programs. They've lost their access to the programs.
Yeah.
The programs just aren't there for them. So now they're saying, we may as well vote blue because I got nothing to lose.
I remember I was talking to the owner of a local gun shop who was a former police officer prior to opening that gun shop. And he was saying that while he was a cop, during the period when Ralph Klein, Premier of Alberta, massively cut the welfare rolls. Yeah. He said crime went down.
Because they left.
Yeah. Now they had to go find jobs, so they were going to starve.
Right. So they didn't have the time to...
So they didn't have the time for crime. And then they had investment in, then they had, labor and emotional investment in stuff. And
exactly. Yeah. Then you have skin in the game. Yeah. Or the people who doubled down on crime simply got caught.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there was repercussions at the time for that, right?
And then of course they're taken out of the system when they're incarcerated.
Yeah.
So cut their welfare rolls. It seems like status quo. Things get worse for the first 30 days. And then it's like status quo for the next 100 days. And then after that, crime rapidly goes down. Yeah. Because of those factors. Yeah, totally I believe that.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it's so interesting. And this is something I really want to get into with Trent on the second part of the Spanish Civil War thing. Mm-hmm. Let's look at those 4 principles and then see, okay, the left abandoned them.
Yeah.
In favor of, what I think, not to give up too much, but what I think are 4 different principles. And then those are simply not, we are now at the point where the house that they built on the alternate 4 principles is collapsing. Yeah. And the left is now deeply in crisis.
Yeah. I look at it and this is probably me projecting. Mm-hmm. But I think that what all the electorates mm-hmm. are looking for, what they've been denied for the last 40, 50 years, is accountability from the executives.
Yes,
right?
From the executive branch.
They've seen there's just been no accountability, right? And the systems, and they've seen how the systems are fundamentally designed to protect the people in it from accountability.
I think COVID really blew the lid off of that.
Supercharged it, right?
Totally. I mean, we could see it before, but I think it was too localized in that you could see it in your professional life, but I couldn't see it because I didn't have access to your professional life. Yeah. I don't work in your industry. Like say I'm just some guy, right? Mm-hmm. Let's say I work in agriculture. Mm-hmm. And so I don't work in energy or resource extraction or minerals or transportation. So when you say, look at what's going on here, I guys like, okay, I got to take your word for it. But I can't get excited about it because I haven't experienced it firsthand. But when I try and tell you about the same problem as it affects agriculture, then you're in the same boat. It's like, well, okay, I'll take your word for it, but I can't get super excited about it. COVID affected everyone. Yeah. And we were all ground zero of that. And we all saw it and we were all affected the same way. And I think it supercharged it. Made it, it put everybody on the same reference, on the same sheet of music. Yeah. And now for the first time, we're all singing the same tune. Yeah. About, how there's no accountability from the executive branch at all.
For any mistake or anything. Nobody gets fired for anything.
Yeah. And the executive branch sees itself like what some people have called the deep state, what some people in the United States have called the swamp, but like the employees of the executive branch have set themselves up as a ruling class, independent of our elected representative, independent of the legislative branch. Yep. And this is coming to a head. They've overplayed their hand. I think COVID, they really did overplay their hand. And now it's coming to a head.
It's not like there weren't indications before, but
but we see those in retrospect.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's just it. Hindsight's 2020.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you think about who lost their job over 9/11.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Yeah.
I can't say nobody did, but it wasn't very many.
Wasn't very many. And again, if you lived
and they worked pretty hard to protect the people who were directly responsible.
And so if you lived in New York, it was a real thing to you.
Yeah.
If you lived in New York or Washington, it was a real thing. Yeah. If you lived in Regina or Kansas City or Dublin, not so much. Yeah. But the signs were there. Yeah. It's just, there was no unifying effect. Yeah. Whereas, it was there before.
For you and me, right? When we talk about, we know what ClimateGate is.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of a memory hole, but we know ClimateGate is.
We know what ClimateGate is.
And we know nobody lost their jobs.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Nobody lost a job. Nobody lost a penny of funding.
Yep.
Nobody lost anything, right?
Yep. There was absolutely no repercussions, no consequence, no sanction for what they did. Yeah. And they just kept right on going. Yeah. Kept right on going. And that suddenly we got everyone all on the same sheet of music with COVID. Yeah. And I think that shocked a lot of people out of their complacency as well. Yeah. Because when you talk about ClimateGate, you're like, so, okay, what are you telling me here? Are you telling me that there's some kind of conspiracy amongst academics and researchers to promote a global warming narrative that's not true? And as I saw, in a written exchange was,
exactly.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. That is the definition You had a group of people who were self-interested.
And it's not a theory, because here's the proof.
Yeah, where they actually did conspire to hold information from the public. That kind of is textbook conspiracy.
Yeah, the contradicted. Yeah, exactly.
And again, it's like people say, "Oh man, I don't want to believe that. If there's any way I cannot believe it, then I won't, because I don't like where that takes me. I don't like, oh my God, think of what that means.
Yeah.
Think of the remedy. I don't want to face that. I want to go back to my happy life." And then 2019 happened. Mm-hmm. And now, like, I remember someone, a civics instructor, who used to say, you should take an interest in your government, because your government takes an interest in you.
Right? Which is, where did that there's a different root in that. Is that, it doesn't matter, I guess. But
I think it's really hard to ignore that in the post-COVID world.
Yeah.
Because there's so many things you could say, it doesn't affect me. Like, they wouldn't do that. Like, I know they could, but they wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
And then COVID came and said, yeah, they did do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
They did. And they'll do it again. So these things are and I don't think it's coincidence that the rise of immigration and populism.
Yeah.
I don't think you would get, I think that the big trigger that we're seeing was the overplaying of the hand of pro-Palestinian mobs.
Yeah.
After October 7th.
Right.
The pro-Palestinian lobby, I guess, various groups, being it radical environmental leftists who had common cause with Hamas, and also Hamas's large network of friendly organizations. But overwhelmingly, these street protests, especially in the first 10 to 14 days, were a flex by the Muslim community across the West. It was a flex by the Muslim diaspora.
Yeah.
And that really frightened a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And I don't think you would get the same mobilization of anti-immigrant opinion had COVID not happened.
No.
If we hadn't had the experience, again, like the supercharge, the blowing of the lid off of the, I guess, the loss of innocence in regards to our executive branch that occurred from 2019 to 2022. That happened, and then this happened. There's a sense of urgency and a sense of alarm that exists within the population in regards to issues that they are simply not finding redress for in the electoral system. Yeah. The number one across the Western world right now I see as being immigration.
Yeah.
And that's really contributing to the zeitgeist of this moment in time.
And this is why I say it comes down to lack of accountability, is because people are discovering that their vote isn't very useful as much as it used to be, right?
Whereas Konstantin Kizin has said, you can't vote your way out of this problem.
Yeah, well, that's just it, right? Like, remember Liz Truss, when she was on Dan Crenshaw's podcast, talking about her failed couple weeks as prime minister. So she was utterly paralyzed by an executive or civil service that
is paralyzed. Yeah.
One that is paralyzed, and two, what it would function would actively work against her. Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
And these people have put themselves, this is why I'm like, I have problems with, like with public sector unions, but I have such harsh views on like the free speech rights of people who work in the public sector is like, they can't be fired. They put themselves in a position. They negotiate contracts, or they can't be fired.
Yeah. Right? Exactly. If when you look at some of the stuff that was it the strike last year? Was it 2023 or was it 2022 when PSAC went on strike?
I can't remember.
When PSAC went on strike, some of the less known demands they had, all that they talked about publicly was work from home.
Yeah.
That's all that really got talked about. But there were a huge number of demands that the Liberals acquiesced to, which were shocking, in that the Liberals would have to fund forced them to fund a given number of radical, hard left political organizations and lobbies.
Yeah.
And that they would have to provide money for PSAC, the union, not the workers, the union, to use as a slush fund for supporting other political causes. That it was pure political, hard left activism that were written into the contracts that, again, was deliberately suppressed by the legacy media.
Yeah.
There's no way they couldn't have known about them because alternative media did.
Yeah.
So, these were... I agree with you to a certain extent that conservative governments are deliberately undermined by the public sector. But I'm also going to say that they're the bigger problem from a holistic society-wide point of view, and most particularly from a progressive point of view, that if I was a Liberal Democrat voter, I would be really concerned about this. The public sector is so sclerotic and so big and so drowning in its own red tape, it cannot even execute the policies it wants.
Yeah, it's gotten...
You look at the utter failure of the Biden administration in the United States and the Trudeau administration in Canada. And I'll even throw in the Albanese administration in Australia to execute key fundamental portions of their own platform. Like, number one, gun control. It is probably one of the single most important things on the progressive ledger to disarm the public. And they've been unable to in Canada.
My newly prohibited rifles have been safe queens or prisoners in my gun safes for 4 years now.
Yes. Now, why is this? There's absolutely nothing technically, politically stopping the Liberal Democrats from doing this. The Conservatives are utterly powerless to stop it. The courts have ruled repeatedly saying that Liberal Democrats... I mean,
they can do what they
again, COVID proved that. Constitution means nothing. Charter of Rights, it's birdcage liner. They can do whatever the hell they want. So why haven't they done it? It's because they're paralyzed. And if you're a progressive, this has got to be setting off, again, red flares into the night sky. When you see the state as the only legitimate solver of problems, the only legitimate figure or institution of agency, something that stands on clay feet and cannot move, is a huge problem for you. Like, again, as we talked about how the people in the bottom income quintile are starting to turn away from the Liberal Democrats. It's because 30 years ago, they were afraid that the Conservatives would take away their access to social welfare programs. Well, now...
the social welfare programs just aren't working. So.
They're just not there.
Yeah.
So they got nothing to lose. Yeah. So this is what I mean. This has got to be a clarion call on the left to see what's happening to the executive branch. They're failing their own constituencies.
Yeah.
And it's going to be an issue.
It's got to be a cognitive dissonance for a progressive to say, well, maybe a government can be too big.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Because that's where we're running.
This challenges everything that they have known and held to be true.
Yeah.
That, again, like, why isn't it working? Yeah. We are in the zenith of progressive power. The zenith of progressive power, where they dominate the governments, they dominate the institutions, they dominate the media, they dominate the arts, they hold all the megaphones in society, even in jurisdictions that were nominally conservative, such as, say, Alberta or Texas. When the rubber hit the road and COVID-19 came to the fore, even these nominally conservative jurisdictions, with exceptions that you can count on one hand with fingers left over, all towed the progressive line. That powerful is their narrative.
And even within North America, some of the ones that didn't were actually, interestingly enough, not conservative. Right?
Yeah.
Like Jared Polis in Colorado was
not nominally conservative. Yeah.
No, Democratic governor of Colorado did not toe the COVID line.
Or say Sweden.
Yeah.
No one has ever accused Sweden of being a hotbed of conservatism.
No, but they absolutely went against the mainstream narrative.
Absolutely went against the mainstream narrative. But nonetheless, my point is still valid that this is the apogee of progressive power.
Yeah.
and things are failing.
Yeah, and it seems like the apogee, it's going to be going to be a pretty swift decline.
And a catastrophic one.
Yeah.
I think for everybody.
But then the other open is can conservative governments, small c conservative governments, can they
fill the void?
Can they fill the void?
Yep.
Can they govern effectively?
Yep. Can they?
Can they?
Do they have the courage?
Can they right the ships? Do they have the courage? Yeah.
Do they have the courage to govern by conservative?
Yeah, because it'll be ugly. Because if you're gonna go at Peace Act, you might have to break the union.
You might have to break the union. Yeah.
Right. Like we're going on strike.
Yep.
See ya.
Who are we going to get? Margaret Thatcher and Ralph Klein, or are we going to get Boris Johnson?
Yeah.
And was it O'Toole?
Aaron O'Toole.
Aaron O'Toole. Yeah. Which one of those two are we going to get?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Or which one of those four? Which one? Are we going to get real legitimate conservatives, or are we going to get guys who talk conservative game, but they don't have the courage or the actual values to pull it off?
Yeah,
that's going to be the question. And if we get Boris Johnson and Aaron O'Toole, the disaffected people who have got nothing to lose, they're going to go hard left.
Yeah, maybe.
They're going to go hard left, and that's what really frightens me.
Yeah.
So that's all I got for this one, man.
All right. Well, I mean, we're going for 2 hours and a bit, so
you can't say they didn't get something out of it.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Like and share and subscribe, and we're on YouTube now. If you don't want to listen on a podcast app.
Oh my God!
So not only are we annoying podcasters, we're annoying YouTubers.
Annoying YouTubers. All right.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.